Welcome back to another video. This one's on developing an application requirement and decommissioning strategy for a project. So what we've tried to do is illustrate what the steps are for, in fact, doing decommissioning. So a number of the artifacts are like within this one. Much of this will be done using the product we talked about earlier, ECIO. There's actually a backend that has a number of the artifacts and tasks, documentation associated with decommissioning. So if we look at this, I'm not going to go into talking a little bit about the details. You can read along here and pause as you kind of see fit. We thought in this particular PowerPoint presentation we talked a little bit about the objectives, some of the topics and the like within this one. We're going to approach it from methodology, some of the deliverables, what are the roles, and again using ECIO tie into some of those roles and how they're captured, etc. So we'll do this. Principally this project was an SAP project that we were doing, and we were looking at a number of consolidation of various applications, and then eventually it would be the SAP tax and revenue management system that they would be migrated to. So we have to in fact decommission a number of systems and applications in this, as well as kind of move those applications over into the new SAP environment. So this talks a little bit about the methodology. We're going to just talk a little bit about what it is. Following is a kind of a short description on just what sunsetting, application, decommissioning is all about, what it's, what it entails, some of the efforts, the letters that go out, etc. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. You can see just kind of the multi-phases in the bottom of this particular slide. You might want to take note of that. We do talk a little bit more about the schedule later on. Okay, so this was fairly significant, and we approached it from a wave perspective. A number of different waves, each of those waves having different applications that would be moved over, and so it was fairly significant. You'll see that put in through this. This is a context diagram. It's kind of simple. It's at the highest level. It talks a little bit about some of the areas that we typically need to worry about for doing a application sunsetting. Application, collecting earlier application requirements. I didn't go into the details on the requirements collection using ECIO. There's another video there on that one, and you can use that one in terms of collecting the requirements, who does what, etc. on that side. But we may add that in a little bit later on just to kind of illustrate it. So again, back to the application, fairly significant. There was over, I think, 80 applications that we were trying to put into place, broken down by components, and then each of those components would be, in fact, have different waves in terms of delivery. This was just a high-level overview on some of the applications that we need to worry about and some of the data sets. Talk a little bit, not going into a lot of details here, just illustrating some of the high points in terms of the waves and what the application. So this was filled out a little bit more detail, didn't really put it into here. Tried to track some of the functionality and requirements. As we've seen some other videos, we do have ways to track those ones, and perhaps you can review that. This is a high-level schedule, just on what we were trying to achieve within that one. Screens. So this next part just talks a little bit about the assumptions, the caveats, the scope, implications, some of those, just to give you a little idea about what we were trying to do. It doesn't go into a lot of details. We did identify critical success factors and KPIs, KGIs. They're not listed here. If you want to get copies of some of this material, please just write us at support@eciosolutions.com, and we'll try to get you as much as we can. You can also pick up a copy of this presentation if you send us an email. We'll send that along to you. So we've gone through, identified some of the constraints, etc. So this just kind of back to illustrating how we can track those. We've got a number of different ways goals are related to different types of other goals, etc. So we're trying to track some of that. Constraints would have been listed here. So we're just going to go and show you a little bit about some of the information that we're collecting on goals. So you can kind of look at this one. There's descriptions. We didn't fill this out here, but you can have a look at it. What some of the linkages that you can kind of go through, pick up, how we measure it on that. So this is a high-level process diagram, just to kind of set the stage for how we're going to proceed on this side. Some of the key tasks, there's kind of a number of management stages which follow along your PMI, which is within each of those ones we have several threads, and those threads are outlined in that previous slide. Some of the artifacts that we're looking at in terms of the documentation, we're specifically over the project was listed there. And then we're going to get into a little bit more details on the for each of those management significant management tasks, what those templates are, and some of the work products coming out of that. So this was initiation planning deliverable. This is execution deliverables. Systems of record, notifications, like within that one. Migration deliverables, just a little bit on what those are about, communications, cutover plans, support plans, post-support plans. Monitor and control, so just that's your status reports. In some cases you may want to put in report cards, scorecards, etc., just to illustrate progress on that one. And then your closure deliverables, the closeout report, you typically want to do a retrospective, etc., and see how that all goes through. And then this next section just talks about, showing you how ECIO is tracking it within each of the groups. So each of those particular deliverables, artifacts, etc., are kind of outlined. If you went into each of those specific ones, you could find out the details on it, what it is, what the information is collected on it. So this next section we'll be talking about roles and responsibilities. From a project perspective, this kind of just is illustrated again. We have some of these roles defined within this particular back end that we have, and this is a technical architect role. The uplink, if there was description, we'd fill out the descriptions. There is separate skills and responsibilities. That's just a high level. The job models, if it's tied into that as well. So these are the some of the working groups. So you've got the roles identified. You've got working groups that are looking at each particular aspect within application application decommissioning. Here's just kind of a high level. We do track that, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So those are the work group details, how the relationships. This is a typical org chart, most of you familiar with in terms of project organization, steering committees, etc., and where they all fit within it. So here it is. This is kind of the organizational tree view. So each of those have been defined within the back end that we have. So we're just going to look at, in fact, the business administration work group. Here's some of the information that's collected on it. There's the narratives. You can have working groups within ECIO or functional groups, project groups on that. And there's lots of relationships that you kind of can find out about it. We're just going to look at functions, some of the high-level functions on it. We could drill into those functions and find out where those functions are actually, other organizations are tied into those functions. This is a table of contents just for the planning guide. As you know, that probably ECIO can track each one of those in the action items and do the follow-up with the orgs, the individuals responsible for the roles. So now, like every other project, we have risk and issues. Here's a couple of them that we've just kind of put in. We're going to show you those in a little bit more detail. We'll tackle number 3 just to look at it, just to show you kind of what it is. We do have a separate video on risk that go into a little bit more detail. It's a little older one. There's been a lot of changes. This one actually talks about temporal or time and budgeting in terms of the risk. So it goes beyond a simple risk register, which just goes about certainty and impact. This one actually goes through and gives you a little bit of an evaluation on, when it's going to happen, and helps out in the prioritization on that side of it. So this now we're going to talk a little bit about next steps and activities. There's a CI. We do have a CMDB attached within ECIO that you can track, and it ties that back to applications and assets, etc. So that's the end of this kind of quick overview on it. There's been lots of material in terms of going in, supplementing it, putting this stuff together. Going to just talk a little bit about some of the systems integration efforts and some of the documentation. There's requirements, functions we talked about, stewardship and governance, and how that all gets put into place, and there is a governance model within ECIO. Here we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the high level. We talked about some of the deliverables and artifacts that you want to produce. We're also going to show you kind of a little bit more details on the schedules that are typically associated with an application decommissioning. So this is, and each of these are be defined within the ECIO. Here's a little bit of background on it. So we have application catalogs, we have asset catalogs and asset details and profiles. It helps out on any of the plans. So if you have change control or statements of work, those things are all tracked, and you can tie those back into the application and the people within that side of it. The continuing on with the deliverable contracts. So there is within ECIO ways to track the details on the contracts, what applications are affected, the CIs that are affected within it. There's a communications plan, the stakeholders, actors, which are identified, and when we want it, how they contribute to each part of it. The fiscal, there's budgeting, financials, which was one of the first things that was kind of put into ECIO on that. Interface management, the interface is back to CMDB. What do we need to do? What are the data, etc. on that data that's kind of going through it. Decommissioning plan, and then operation shutdown plan on what we need to do, network equipment, production processes are identified. There is processes and work instructions contained within ECIO. But project processes management, this is something just in terms of, what are the management plans associated with the project. Records management, there's a separate video on records and library management. It allows you to kind of tie in, where things are located. Staffing plans, we do track resources and skill sets and what we need to do, training plans that are tied into that. So each of those are in fact supported onto it. Here's an example just of a decommissioning checklist. This is kind of Excel, though we do have a mechanism that does a checklist within ECIO that kind of goes through and monitors the results. This is a schedule, Microsoft schedule, that we track tasks and activities at a high level with some of the details onto it. We use Microsoft. There's an export to Microsoft project that allows you to kind of pull those things in and get those things tied up. It's a great product to do that with. In some cases I haven't put down all the individuals that have contributed to this and some of the efforts. Want to obviously try to keep this presentation too short. Some of the action items we wanted to move, there was a site called Confluence that we were going to move to, and then we do have RACI charts that are not included here that we kind of outline on that side. And so those are the touch points that we kind of at a high level kind of illustrate each of those interfaces that we need to worry about. As anything else, the interfaces, you need to look at it from a business, how those, what are the IT involvement, the business units involved and like within it. Here's an example just of some of the interfaces as ECIO tracks them, just a copy of the report on that. on that side of it. So I think that probably wraps it up for this presentation. Thanks very much. If you need more information, feel free to write us at support@eciosolutions.com or go to our website. Again, we're trying to make this a inexpensive mechanism that you can kind of buy for roughly the price of a book, and you can kind of have a back end and understand a little bit about it, and then actually have working examples of how this stuff it's actually put into place, and then copy the back end and use it for your own means. So it should make it a little easier for you.